Hello and welcome everyone to our Power Sides podcast, a podcast series brought by Powerweave. In this show, as usual, we talk to experts in various fields and industries, their insights and experiences with cutting edge technologies. We also try to understand how you can use all of this in the field of digital transformation, AI, and how these can impact your businesses and industries around the world. I am your host Deepak Gavas, and with me we have Aviral Bajpai, our VP of Technology at Powerview. And today we are going to talk about why data security is of extreme importance in your digital transformation journey. Welcome, Aviral.
Thanks, Deepak. Glad to be here again. For some reason, I always end up getting a lot of notoriety within the family when I do this podcast. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So, uh, data security is a hugely spoken, and while all of us do like to talk about it, I have guessed that not everybody understands it the way they should be, and given that it's a very technical topic, you can't expect everybody to understand. But since its impact is extremely critical, a single data breach can impact so much, and there are legal, there are revenue, there are compliance, all sort of issues that can arise from it. So, how would you explain data security in a very layman words to our audience?
Um, I mean, there are a lot of ways to sort of describe this. Uh, what I'd say is that it's a combination of a few critical things, and it largely is to do around uh, making sure that data remains confidential. It has the amount of integrity that it needs to have. It's only available to the authorized systems and individuals now because most of the systems are integrated to one another. And we need to, of course, it's not just individuals that are using it anymore. So it's also, the right system should have access to the right data and nothing more. And it's a combination of, technical, physical, and administrative, safeguards that sort of comes together and sort of creates this bubble that we sort of term data security in general. And I think that the goals, if we were to think about that, would be one is that availability should not be compromised. While we are making sure that the wrong people don't have access to the wrong stuff, we do want to make sure that the right people do have access to the right stuff. Excuse me. Then, of course, the accuracy and consistency should be there, and then, of course, not only in terms of the kind of right entities should be provided access to the right people, but also the right roles. So, for example, if I'm talking about let's say uh, the data around the Parvi's effort estimations and let's say the Parvi's effort tracking across different projects. I need to make sure that not only does the engineering team have access to it, but they should only have access to the stuff that pertains to them even within that. So that's another layer to that. So which is in layman terms, it would be termed as uh, not only defining the kind of tables that you would have access to, but also the rows. So row level access should also be clearly defined. And we should be extremely sensitive about some information a lot more than let's say others, and there needs to be extra effort that goes into it, so that is critical. Another major point that often gets overlooked and doesn't get as much coverage is compliance with regulations. So whether it is HIPAA, whether it is GDPR, we need to make sure that in the right geographies, we are dealing with the right kind of regulations, and they're being dealt with in the manner that they're supposed to. Um, and data security also does touch upon business continuity a little bit. So um, you know, we need to have data security that is uh, in line with policies that are to do with continuing business in times of stress. So that overlay also exists, and securities and practices and policies need to be uh, adaptable to those circumstances as well. So that those are the high level points that I would say sort of talk about data security in general.
So, you try to sum up data security for us, and while there are too many factors, it is internal, it is external, it comprises of your integrations. Why would you call it one of the most critical pieces in digital transformation? And I'll tell you why that question. Whenever we speak to our clients at Purview, or generally when you talk to any prospects, a common understanding, or you may say, most of the common assumption is we don't really have that kind of data, to figure out security beyond a point. We have basic logins and passwords. We don't really need to worry about data security beyond a point. And sometimes it becomes difficult for people convince people that it doesn't matter in what phase your business is. It is still critical because it is your data, your business's data, your customers' data. So how what would be your argument to somebody who believes that data security is not for me?
So I'll just try to outline a few things that can maybe uh, you know go south when we're talking about data security. So one is, and it sadly has, unfortunately, has been very very common in the past few. It's getting more and more common, honestly, in the past few years, in particular, is sensitive information being available to parties that were never supposed to have access to it. So the personal data of any kind that is to do with medical, financial records, trade secrets, uh, all of that is really, really difficult to be managed appropriately, and it needs to have policies that go way beyond what you would do with regular data access. To the extent that you should be encrypting it, ideally end to end, and so on. So that's just one example of what we should be doing. And any kind of breach that happens uh, on, let's say, any kind of personal information or sensitive information, especially financial, is it could be a really big headache, um, both in terms of managing it and getting on top of it technically, but also in terms of just the sheer financial risk that it sort of could pose. Then, of course, there is non-compliance with the regulations. As I said earlier, things like HIPAA and GDPR, and other such regulations in different geographies. They need to be respected really, really deeply, and non-compliance can lead to lot of penalties, legal liabilities. In general, I think it's not great for any entity's reputation. Uh, you need to do as much as you can to protect your organization from any kind of legal and therefore financial implications. Um, Data breaches, as I said, again becoming really really common. Again, reputation damage, loss of customer trust is a big one. So while I do trust somebody like a Google to manage my data today, if something like a data breach would happen on, let's say, Google Docs, people would or organizations that are at a certain of a certain reputation would think twice before putting their data again on Google, right? So that is a big one, and you know, and in terms of data breaches, it is there are two things. There are two aspects to it. One is, of course, protecting yourself against situations where there could be breaches. But equally important, and I would say more important, is to have systems in place that make sure that you know there is a potential threat, and what is your SOP around dealing with that. So that's another thing. So uh, this would deter attackers a lot more than just your reputation, right? So making sure that you have the systems in place to make sure that you know any breach is averted, but equally understood that it has happened, because there are a lot of situations where unauthorized entities have access to certain amount of data which the organizations don't even understand they have access to. So that is equally critical, um, because otherwise you're shooting in the dark. Then of course it all starts with managing vulnerabilities on different parts of your technology stack, and I'd say it's critical to it's critical to trust, it's critical to reputation, it is critical to business continuity in a lot of cases, because some businesses just cannot continue without a certain level of robustness around these things. And then, as I said, detecting breaches if they happen, and of course making sure that they don't happen at all by mitigating as many vulnerabilities as possible.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is, and again, I'm just trying to think aloud, is imagine if all the tools you use, which is your Google Suite, maybe your Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Amazon Web Servers, if they don't follow data security, imagine what hell it would be for any tech company, or for that matter, any company. Because even if you are not a tech company, even if you are somebody who's, let's say, an apparel manufacturer, your digital designs could be out there with your competitors before you could do anything with it. Your customer data, all their transactions could be out there with somebody else, and they could be sold on the dark web for whatever cost it is, and you lose all trust, you lose all possible revenue, you lose all credibility that you have earned throughout the years, and I mean, the legal implications would be beyond this. So
Yeah, so tons of things that can go wrong. Yeah, you put it absolutely correctly. So many different types of consequences that can get created as a result of things going wrong in this regard. So it is something that uh, you should not be taking uh, you know as a side project. It is something that should be a part of critical business operations, and if that's not being done, then it's basically a recipe for disaster.
great one. So what are the common mistakes that you have seen businesses make? You may say under the pretext of data security, or they are not even aware, but they simply do because why does it matter?
Yeah, so I think I'd start with point zero, uh, which is essentially the approach in general. Okay, so it's quite common to hear that okay, data security is not for me. I don't have any critical data, and that is point number zero that I mentioned. The first thing that you need to change is, of course, realizing that you have a lot of things that can go wrong. There's a lot of consequences that can arise out of things that are going wrong with your end. Then, of course, common problems that happen, and the reasons behind those would be anything from something as basic as having your password policies being you know administered correctly, and that is a very very general one. I believe a lot of organizations don't have strong enough password policies. That's the most basic thing that you could change across all of your systems, of course.
Or you could
Then
have one common passwords for all employees.
you'd be surprised at how many systems do that, right? And it's also when you're trying to give access to somebody uh, on a certain system, it also becomes a very very easy way to do that as well. So people fall into that trap very often. Um, but even if that is a short term, although just don't do it. But even if you do it for the short term, make sure that you have policies enough to make to have everybody reset their credentials every X days or whatever, right? So very very basic stuff around default or weak passwords. Then, of course, there is the general tendency to neglect failures, neglect updating, update, going to the next update and updating your plugins. And, for example, if you talk about WooCommerce, if you are on the open source version of WooCommerce, it is critical that you keep updating your plugins. It is critical that you keep updating your themes. It is a significant security risk. And it is significant security risk because there are vulnerabilities that are being exposed every day, and therefore, whatever comes along in terms of security patches, in terms of version updates, needs to be applied. You should not be waiting for something to break on your site to sort of go in and update your plugins or themes. Uh, because a lot more can go wrong than just your site being down or just people spamming your comments, for example. That's not the worst thing that can happen. So that would be another critical one. And just a soft plug for our offering. I mean, we do have a managed offering on top of WooCommerce, which is our Revis platform as well, a part of a Revis platform. So we can do that for you, and a lot of things that we talk about today are part of that. Uh, but yeah, so that's a critical one. And while it does consume a little bit of time, it's not so much that you should neglect this. Then another one is stuff like malware scanning, which is I'd say security measures, adequate security measures being in place so that you have the basics in place to protect any kind of the usual vectors, if you will. So a vector is basically a way of attack or a road to attack. Uh, so that is what is called a vector in the security space. So eliminating as many vectors as you can. So, for example, put a firewall on top of your offering so that only the correct ports are exposed. None of the unused ports are exposed. Your if there is something being exposed from the operating system side, it is not available to the public uh, to even try doing. So, for example, if you have Linux servers, you don't want to expose the port that allows access to uh, uh, the command line access or whatever. Just basic stuff. Um, then, of course, as I said, a reliable firewall, malware scanning. Those would be the critical security measures that you have to take. Then would be how secure is your payment processing system? What kind of compliances does it adhere to? What kind of encryption methods is it using? Um, has it got the necessary systems in place to detect when something goes wrong and detect when a potential financial fraud is happening and other things. So there needs to be a detailed audit of payment processing systems and payment gateways in general. Not only in terms of what are the features that they offer and what are the kind of payment methods that they support, but also equally in terms of are they robust enough in terms of security practices. Um, and the last one is also very important and is something that is getting more and more traction now. Um, and people sort of talk about it in terms of calling it zero trust, but I'd say having the minimal possible user access and privileges to users and user roles as possible. Again, this is just building on top of eliminating attack vectors. Right? So the lower amount of access that each and every user individually has, the lower the chances of something going wrong. If, for example, something does happen with their credentials, somebody does some sort of social engineering and does gain access to some users' account, then you know just restrict that as much as possible, and that is one more thing that could help in terms of mitigating uh, uh, issues if they do happen.
So you spoke about a lot of pieces, and if I had to summarize that, you need to have some basic policies in terms of the access roles. You also need to have certain systems in place to maintain and ensure that if there is something uh, wrong with your systems, you should be able to identify at the right time and not something when the whole damage is done. You briefly did touch upon the piece where we spoke about the open source tech, and in our conversations we have often seen that people are a bit concerned when it comes to open source tech. How good is it? Is it secure? What about its maintenance? Things like this. And practically a lot of things that we use, like Android, are open source tech, and still there is a concern around this. What would you say, in terms of which one is more secure, an open source tech, a proprietary tech? And the the reason I'm asking this is a lot of websites, a lot of tech apps which are being built, and what we build at Powerview use a combination of all this tech. So, I am sure our customers would like to know about this particular piece in detail.
So there are it's so you're absolutely right. They're very different in terms of the way that they operate. When we're talking about open source software versus proprietary software, and they have their own set of ups and downs and pros and cons. So I'd just go over a few, let's say, on the open source side. So first is you know transparency, which is what you get when it's table stakes when it comes to open source. Um, it essentially allows the user to view the source code. This transparency, of course, it allows for a larger community to be created around the code and they around reviewing the code. It allows, while it does allow for a certain amount of understanding from an attacker's perspective as well, equally it also allows for identification of vulnerabilities quickly if you have a large community, and also contribution to improving the security of these systems. And it therefore, to a large extent, promotes transparency, accountability, and peer review. So, so that not only is your own organization sort of dealing with with these issues, but there is a larger community at play, and there, if they're big enough, they contribute heavily to security, and I think a large amount of contributions that go towards repos is to deal with mitigating or dealing with different kinds of fixes and updates. Uh, then the other thing that happens is since you have this large team of people that are looking at it, that are contributing to it, that are identifying issues, there's a very rapid vulnerability identification and patching that automatically sort of happens. It is nothing to do. You essentially don't need to do it. It is being done by the community because the community finds value into it. Um, Of course, with that comes flexibility and customizability. With that comes, you know, the ability for the attackers to understand the system in extreme detail, right? Which is the flip side of it. And however, what we've seen in general is that given the more diverse security expertise that comes with open source, because even when you're talking about a proprietary system, you're essentially talking about a set of few people that are going to be, looking at what the vulnerabilities are, patching them, and creating fixes, and both on the dev and DevOps side combined. With open source, you get that on steroids because there are different types of experts that come in and contribute to your code base. So somebody could be an expert on, let's say, uh, uh, attacks that can happen on the DDoS side. Somebody else could be an expert on, attacks that are to do with social engineering and therefore how to prevent that and all of that. So you get uh, the added benefit of all of these different people trying to contribute and make this uh, you know this software piece of code, whatever you want to call it, better in terms of security, so that they can continue to extract value out of it. So that's on the open source side. On the proprietary side as well, there are upsides and there are different. As I said, it's a completely different situation, and there are different types of upsides, downsides. So on the proprietary side, there is the first thing that happens is there is a controlled development and testing environment, right? So it is if there is a large enough focus on security, the development process and testing can be very very tightly controlled, and therefore we can ensure a lot of a certain level of robustness around security. Um, and often it is it's seen that companies invest heavily in regular security audits, regular security testing, and all of that, because again, uh, they're not betting on a community to do it for them. They have to do it themselves, and therefore they end up spending more on things like, let's say, penetration testing. The other thing that is great about proprietary software is that it does allow for a centralized support, because there is by definition a company that's backing it, right? So users can directly contact this proprietary vendor, right, and talk about security related issues. And prompt assistance can sometimes help very very heavily in terms of both updates and in terms of mitigating certain types of situations. Um, Another thing is, of course, many of these things are protected under intellectual property most of the times, and therefore it is not even visible to a lot of the inherent details are not even visible to the public. Um, and of course, hopefully there will be a better response from, let's say, a proprietary system than an open source system, because you are essentially dealing with you know reporting an issue and then waiting for somebody to get around to it on the open source side. So usually that is the case. Uh, Now I'd say there is a situation where there is a best of both, and I think one of our offerings sort of fits there. So while we are using open source technology as the heart of the software, we do have support on top of it. We do have, a dedicated team that is uh, accountable for providing rapid response time. There, that is, accountable for providing that quick support in times of need. And there is an accountable team that does, not only functional testing but security testing as well. So if you think about our EVIS offering on top of WooCommerce, I'd say that sort of is the best of both worlds in this case. So while we're having the open source community behind it, we also have the support systems around it to make sure that not only is the rapid sort of development of new vulnerabilities being fixed by a diverse set of users, but also we have people accountable for security, people accountable for quality, for intellectual property, and rapid response. So yeah.
Yeah. So quite detailed, Aviral. So what you're saying is both both the open source and the proprietary have their own pros and cons. And from a security perspective, the measures which you spoke about would be applicable for both. It doesn't matter whether it's open source or proprietary. If you don't have the support system, the support processes, it doesn't matter. You are still vulnerable to all those attacks. And I do remember in one of our previous conversations, you did mention that, you know, it's impossible to build any tech without some amount of open source tech. So, uh, could you elaborate on that piece a bit? Because, I was quite surprised when I found out about that piece, and I am sure a lot of our audience would also be surprised because not everybody understands this.
So yeah, Deepak, you're absolutely right in terms of that statement, and that there's barely any piece of proprietary system that can be created today without some sort of open source, you know, code sort of sneaking in there. And that is true of, let's say, a lot of ASP.NET NuGet packages that we install when we're writing code, because there are dependencies that we need to rely on. It's for something, let's say, something as basic as time zone conversion, something as basic as string parsing, the list goes on and on. Um, Something as basic as that to, let's say, payment processing integration. Everything between this vast, set of things that we need to do on the code side would rely on a lot of open source technology, NuGet packages, NPM packages on the JavaScript side, um, plugins and extensions on the databases. A large amount of that code is not written by you know teams in-house anymore. So it's essentially impossible for you to create a system today that does not rely on open source foundations. That's one. The other bit that's eye-opening is that the companies that were considered to be, let's say, highly proprietary and highly traditional, and people like my companies like Microsoft today have the highest contributions in terms of pull requests, in terms of code being pushed into their repositories by third parties, right? Even more than companies that were considered traditionally highly collaborative, highly highly mature in terms of adapting to ecosystems like Google, etc. Right? So today, and GitHub is owned by Microsoft today to a large extent because of their because of their commitment towards open source and other things. So yeah, very difficult. You're absolutely right. It's very difficult today to write any proprietary piece of software that's completely proprietary. You just cannot do it. It's virtually impossible.
So, uh, since we heavily deal with e-commerce solutions and AI solutions, any e-commerce related tech or any AI related tech, any examples of the popular tech you can mention which so-called use either open source tech or maybe are fully 100% open source tech?
I'd be hard pressed to give you one that does not use open source uh, at all. So, for example, on the e-commerce side, WooCommerce itself is open source, right? And it relies on WordPress, which again is open source. If you talk about the biggest sort of new age ERPs, they're sort of open source. So there's so many examples of that. Odoo, OpenERP, ERP Next, right? So many different examples of that, and if we deep dive into any of the larger ERPs as well, you'd find open source technologies under those. Um, so I don't know if there's something specific that you wanted to highlight, but I think I just cannot think of anyone that does not rely on proprietary, even our own proprietary stacks that we have in house. At the end of the day, there are a combination of it's an ASP.NET, for example. If we talk about the ASP.NET stack, eCommerce, it does rely heavily on NuGet packages, for example, right? For, as I said, for different reasons, we need to have them, and they need to be updated. They need to be kept updated. They need to be and we need to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities within that code base as well, not just the code that we are writing. So, uh, you know, it, it all boils down to making sure that you have the processes in place uh, to know what you need to maintain, right? Because uh, unlike what people would suggest, not only the code that you write is the code that you need to maintain. It's not that at all. You need to be able to um, update and maintain the code that others have written for you as well, equally. And sometimes it's even it's more difficult to do that than to maintain your own code base. So while it may be quicker to get started with, sometimes it becomes a problem if the originator or the owner of that code base is not maintaining it going forward. So we need to be careful about that.
Got it. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, how the tech world has changed from being proprietary to, it's open, it's transparent, which is a good thing. So, uh, with all those things in mind, what are the what are the processes, or what are the systems in place at Powerweave which you set up to ensure all the customer sites are secured and are maintained properly? Could you touch upon a few pieces? So, and maybe if possible, you could highlight a few uses of why each of these things, how do they work?
Sure. So it starts with something very, very simple and very, very basic, like having the right kind of firewalls and firewall rules in place, right? That is the bare essentials around networking, right? So that is, of course, needed. Making sure that uh, all of your infrastructure ideally resides within a single virtual private, within a single VPC within AWS, for example, so that databases are not accessible externally at all, unless we specifically allow them to be accessed for, let's say, BI reporting reasons or whatever, where we can allow specific ports through to allow it. You know, nobody just you just cannot access it. Uh, so that's some of the bare basics. Then comes, the uh, let's say the processes that we have on top of that. That's human resources dependent, right? So we have teams that make sure that the WordPress platform itself, the themes that we're using, let's say if we're using Elementor or if we're using any other plugins that are on top of WordPress or extensions on WooCommerce, they are updated regularly, and we make sure that the vulnerabilities, if any, within those code bases are either addressed or mitigated, which is extremely critical. So if there is, for example, a new vulnerability that crops up tomorrow, we know that we have the processes in place to make sure that if there is an attack vector that relies on a certain kind of access, we make sure that we deal with it on a networking perspective that does not allow that to happen, while the developers and the owners of that code base may be working on a fix. So we go to that level, and of course there are certain basics that need to be in place in terms of using strong and unique passwords, encouraging people to use things like two-factor authentication, not give out give out keep default passwords and give out passwords in general, because that's the most difficult thing to let's say mitigate from our end, because then essentially they're acting as you, right? And they do have access to the systems as you, and it becomes the most difficult thing to handle. Um, we of course make sure that we do extremely secure hosting environments. So we make sure that we have not only regular backups and security measures like intrusion detection systems, but we also make sure that we adhere to the latest versions of TLS and therefore SSL. And we make sure that we have the right monitoring systems in place to, not only identify vulnerabilities, but also identify attacks if any, uh, that do happen. Uh, Another example of such a security measure is, payment processing systems. So we make sure that they're compliant. They're compliant to, they're compliant to the law of the land that we are operating, that the site is operating within, and general best practices around how data is handled. Then there are certain things that can, help you in terms of just WooCommerce in general. So popular things like WordFence, iTheme, Security, Security, whatever helps prevent brute force attacks, prevent any kind of ports being allowed even on the software level, scanning for malware, scanning for user activity, and looking at anomalous activities and things like that. So these some popular things that you can do right off the bat, even if you're using open source. I highly recommend that you look at some of these plugins to make sure that nothing's going wrong. And simple things like making sure cross-site scripting isn't happening, making sure SQL injections are not possible, making sure we have hardware firewalls in place to make sure distributed denial of service DDoS, as I said, is not possible. Those would be the things that we cover on top of all the things that we talked about earlier.
That's a lot of tech speak. So, what I'm going to assume from this is that there are human as well as automatic processes which ensure that all the online sites, on all the online stores that you build at Powerview has all these security processes or procedures in place.
So maybe just for explaining the three things that I said at the end, uh, SQL injections, cross-site scripting, and distributed denial of service. I think these are very, very common attacks. So I'll just talk about those three to explain what they are. So SQL injection is essentially somebody who's trying to run a database query uh, from either the front end or some other vector. Uh, so there are set standards around how to make sure that that does not happen. So both on the proprietary stack as well as the offerings that we have on top of open source, we make sure that that is catered to, that is taken care of. And even if you are very skilled at writing SQL queries in general, you can't just delete all of our users by typing delete hashing from users or whatever. Uh, that is one. The other thing is cross-site scripting is somebody being able to add JavaScript to the page by, let's say, typing JavaScript within text boxes, uh, which actually is slightly more involved. So you need to do a lot of things to make sure that that doesn't happen, because at a lot of places you'd see that when you enter text, it is being it is being displayed on another page. So if there is a potential that you could write a JavaScript code uh, and that gets printed on the page and therefore read from the browser as JavaScript and executed. So that we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. And of course, the last one is extremely interesting, which is distributed denial of service attacks. So there is a primitive version of that, which is denial of service attack. So you use a system and essentially you hit, let's say, the login mechanism of another site, let's say hundreds of thousands of times a second. So what you're doing is essentially you're engaging the system in doing something so that it is not able to serve the normal purpose that it is supposed to serve. Right? So if you have a traditional server where resources are limited, and all of the resources are going towards dealing with the hundreds of thousands of requests that are coming from a single machine, let's say. You don't have resources to serve a user when they're logging, when they're typing the URL in the browser. So when you're going to the site, it's basically hung because it's dealing with other things. And a more matured version of this attack is that uh, you don't do it from one system. You do it from a variety of systems all across the globe onto one service. And sadly, unfortunately, there are paid services that allow you to do it. So you can if there are if there aren't enough DevOps best practices in place, and it's not a highly available system that's scaled worldwide, it's very easy for someone to make sure that your service is busy doing stuff that does not matter and therefore is not able to serve other actual customers, users, whatever. So that's distributed denial of service attacks, and there are multiple ways of preventing it. As I said, hardware firewalls, so that not any number of requests beyond a certain number from a certain source does not go through. It's just a reply to okay, we're busy, get back to you later, or whatever. And of course, making sure that the systems that we deploy are deployed not on a single machine, but a scalable, highly available auto scaling cluster. So there isn't a single place to attack. There are, you have scaled out the system in multiple systems, in multiple geographies, in multiple regions. So it's pointless to attack so many different places. It's just not possible. And you don't even have the individual accesses to do it anyway. It's usually through a URL which points to one of the instances, not all of them. So, yeah, multiple different things like this. But very, very interesting stuff, and I'd recommend everybody to read about this because it's not,
Yeah.
the world isn't a safe place anymore, honestly.
If I have, let's say, since a lot of our customers have their e-commerce stores, I'm going to just use one of their examples. So let's say if any of these attacks happens, or or any of their site is impacted by any such vulnerability, if I am their customer, if I visit their store, would their store be unavailable to me, or would I be not able to do any certain actions? What would be my experience as their customer?
You won't be able to load the site in the first place because the servers are just too busy to even acknowledge that a request has been sent to them. As I said, it's millions of requests from a single source, and then it's not just a single source; it's distributed worldwide, and it's all trying to just bottle you up. Um, it also leads to uh, a high amount of data throughput into your network. So your data, if there are data costs associated, depending on what kind of infrastructure you're deploying your servers on, your data cost could rise, extremely high because there is that amount of data being pumped into those number of requests being pumped into your cluster. So,
Okay.
yeah, multiple things
So
that
not
can go wrong.
so not just you lose data as a business, but because your customers can't access your site, there's a direct impact on your revenue.
Precisely. Which is why it's called a denial of service attack. You're essentially denying the service to other people. You're hogging the resources up so that it's derived to other people. That's what you're doing.
Oh, interesting. So,
I don't know if you've
thank you,
heard of
Rifat.
Die Hard 4
Which one?
and Die Hard 4,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
was a very, very cheesy movie, and it wasn't an accurate representation of what happens in the real world at all. But one of the things that helped me clarify what that was in the initial days was, when he was when one of the hackers was, sending pop-ups to the second one so that they couldn't work on the actual stuff. I mean, that's essentially what systems are doing to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, now that you have mentioned movies, I remember one particular scene from Mr. Robot where it essentially sends out a form which says that just enter your details so you could qualify to win a particular piece, and that data is later on used to derive certain lucky guesses or just guesses to infiltrate a particular platform. I mean, I
Yeah,
was so shocked when I realized that. I mean, it could be that simple and innocent.
it's a combination of phishing and social engineering. I believe Mr. Robot, by the way, highly recommend anyone to sort of watch it if you're into networking, data security in general. I think that's a must watch. However, it's really on the emotional side, it's a depressing show, but
Yeah. So if you recommend all those websites, I am
very
sure
active.
people
So Linux command, for example.
people would stay away from digital technologies.
Yeah.
So jokes about one final one, because everyone's talking about AI in so many ways. Would the same security measures also be applicable for a particular AI solution, or there is anything else that would be needed there?
So, in terms of how AI could enhance security of, uh, um, let's say, our offerings, I think there are a few things there. And I think this is a rapidly evolving space as well. So, lots of research going into how this can happen. But on the broad, from a broad perspective, I think there is threat detection systems, and there are threat prevention systems, right? So, uh, something I'd give you an example. So, if there is a login that happens from an anomalous location, an anomalous kind of device, that is that is not usual of the kind of things that we've seen from either the user or the set of users. That could go into a, any kind of a flow, and there could be, let's say, alerts being triggered to humans as well as a part of that flow. So that is one sort of way to do it. And some of the things that you would have noticed in your day-to-day life as well would be something like if you go ahead and create a transaction on a foreign site, even on the banking side, in general day-to-day you would have seen this. If you do a transaction on a US site or whatever, and you usually don't do it, there's sometimes a call that comes in just to check, okay, is this transaction done by you? Just press one if that is the case, just to make sure, okay, this is something that you don't usually do. Is it actually you that did this? So that somebody else doesn't have access to your details and doing it for you. Um, Similar things would be, or let's say an extension of that would be user behavior analytics, and detecting anomalies around behaviors, not just from where they're accessed, but other transactions as well. So the kind of things that people are buying, or let's say the, the kind of places that they're going to within, let's say, if it is a marketplace, the kind of categories that they're visiting or whatever, this that could trigger something on the systems as well. Um, and this is just done to, as I said, prevent fraudulent activities to whatever extent is possible. Uh, AI is also used to detect malware. So, for example, uh, the same thing that is done on user transactions, user behaviors, user logins, etc., and other things, the same principles can be applied to, let's say, analyzing the signatures of files, analyzing characteristics and trying to identify characteristics that are usually associated with malwares, and running those systems live on and these are AI based models that run on systems to and understand, okay, this could be something that is not usually done by services that are running on our servers, and why is this happening, and this is anomalous, so mark it and maybe flag it to somebody so that they can review. So this would sort of enable real-time detection, real-time prevention. If there is a certain service that is running and it shouldn't be, and stopping it doesn't stop the website from running, you just better off just stop it. Uh, and other things. So another example would be uh, a chatbot based security assistant. Something as simple as that could be AI helping out with assistance around security. And in a lot of places, you can also you know do you can also sort of predict stuff that is going to happen, and if it is really far from what you had predicted as well, that would be something that could be a certain potential risk or whatever. So you could do things like that as well.
Got it. So yeah, a lot of monitoring can happen via AI to flag off anomalies or notice an unusual pattern as a
Yeah,
as
both on
maybe
an
a warning, or it could trigger a warning.
yeah.
Yeah. So great, Aviral. I think it was a great chat, and thank you for sharing everything in terms of data security and how businesses should be cognizant of it. I'm sure there would be a lot to cover with specific use cases, which could be a conversation for some another day. But till then, thank you for today and thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much.